Welcome to the Quantanix YouTube channel. This is the NextLayer podcast, episode 10. Today we're doing a deep dive into something pretty complex, right at the intersection of technology and some really fundamental human questions. The morality of machines. Basically, the morality of machines. AI and ethics today. We've gathered, well, quite a stack of sources here. Foundational stuff, recent research, even regulatory ideas, all looking at how we try to build ethics into AI. Our mission really is to sift through all this for you, pull out the key insights, and explore what it actually means to embed ethical decision-making into these systems that, let's face it, are influencing more and more of our lives. Think of it as a shortcut, yeah? A way to get up to speed on one of the big issues of our time, hopefully with a few, aha moments thrown in. Okay, so let's maybe start at the beginning, the sort of conceptual foundations for thinking about machine morality.
Absolutely. And it's almost impossible to talk about that without mentioning Isaac Asimov. Way back in 1942, long before AI was really a practical thing, he introduced his 3 laws of robotics in the story Runaround.
Ah, yes, the 3 laws. They seem so neat, didn't they? What were the original ones again?
Well, they were really a pioneering attempt to set out some universal ethical rules for artificial beings. First law, a robot may not injure a human being or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm.
Okay, do no harm.
Second law, a robot must obey the orders given it by human beings except where such orders would conflict with the first law.
Obey humans unless it means harm. Got it.
And the third law, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second laws.
Protect yourself, but humans come first. Sounds straightforward. But I seem to remember his stories always pushed the boundaries.
They really did. That's the fascinating part. Asimov himself, through his fiction, constantly explored the limitations, the paradoxes these simple rules created. They just kept running into dilemmas.
Right.
Which is why he eventually had to introduce the Zeroth law.
The Zeroth law. What was that?
It was essentially a higher-level principle. A robot may not harm humanity, or, by inaction, allow humanity to come to harm. This could even override the other laws, potentially impacting an individual human for the sake of the species.
Wow. So even in fiction, the simple rules needed caveats. It really does feel like it foreshadows the kind of complex ethical knots we're tying ourselves in with modern AI, doesn't it?
It absolutely underscores that core challenge. How do you take something as complex, as nuanced, sometimes as contradictory as human morality, and translate it into code, into algorithmic rules? It's much harder than just writing 3 sentences.
And the field itself, machine ethics, it's moved way beyond just Asimov's initial ideas now. It's not only about how AI treats humans.
That's a really key point from the sources, yeah. As AI systems get more complex, they interact more with other systems, other AIs, so the ethics have to consider machine-to-machine interactions too.
And the philosophical approaches have really broadened out. It's not just about following rules anymore.
Right. The discussion draws heavily on philosophy now. You see different ethical frameworks being explored, like virtue ethics, the idea of creating machines that embody positive traits, like being trustworthy or fair.
Instead of just ticking boxes on rules.
Exactly, which is different from, say, consequentialism, where you just judge an action by its outcome, a sort of purely utilitarian approach. Or deontology, which is all about sticking to rigid rules or duties, no matter the outcome.
So the focus shifted from just how do humans feel about this robot to how should this machine actually make a moral choice?
Precisely. It's moving towards those normative questions. What principles should guide AI? And importantly, the sources emphasize this has to be human-centered. It can't just be a technical exercise. We have to think about the wider social impact.
Okay, let's pivot to the challenges we face right now trying to actually program this stuff. And, I mean, moral relativism seems like a huge one. Whose morality do you pick?
Yeah, that's possibly the thorniest issue. AI doesn't operate in a vacuum. It's global. But ethics, morality, they vary massively across cultures, legal systems. What's right in one place might be deeply wrong somewhere else.
So finding a universal standard is difficult.
Incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
Maybe impossible, some argue.
You really see this play out in the research around the trolley problem, which comes up in our sources.
Oh, definitely. That research is so revealing. Even within fairly similar societies, people have conflicting intuitions. Intellectually, some might say, sure, that self-driving cars should swerve to save 5 pedestrians, even if it hits 1 person. The utilitarian choice.
The logical choice, maybe.
Maybe. But then you ask them, would you buy a car programmed to potentially sacrifice you, the occupant, to save others? And suddenly, people aren't so keen.
Yeah, I can see that. Theory is one thing, personal safety is another.
Exactly. And that gap, that tension between an abstract principle like minimizing harm, and our very real instinct for self-preservation, that's a massive headache for engineers.
And choosing which value to prioritize the utilitarian outcome or individual safety that directly feeds into the problem of bias, right?
Absolutely. If your training data reflects past human biases, or if you explicitly program an AI based on one cultural or philosophical viewpoint, you risk encoding discrimination. You bake those biases right into the system.
And we've seen real-world examples of this, haven't we? The sources mention things like racial bias in healthcare software.
Yes, healthcare prediction software showing bias.
Yeah.
And also algorithmic tools used in the criminal justice system that seem to have disproportionately negative effects on certain communities, often marginalized ones.
It's a stark reminder that AI isn't inherently neutral. It learns from us, warts and all.
It reflects the data it's fed and the values, sometimes unconscious values, of the people building it.
And it's not just these big philosophical or societal issues. There are technical limitations too, right?
Yeah, that's important to remember. What we currently call AI, particularly machine learning, it's largely about spotting patterns. It's incredibly sophisticated statistical analysis, really.
But not actual thinking, not moral reasoning like a person does.
Not in the way we understand it, no. There's a whole debate about whether true moral agency requires consciousness or self-awareness, which current AI almost certainly lacks.
And human morality is so flexible. We adapt to the situation, the context.
Right. We pick up on nuances, social cues, unspoken rules, algorithms. They rely on the patterns they've learned or the explicit rules they're given, put them in a totally new situation, one outside their training data.
They might just break or do something weird.
Or produce an outcome that's unexpected and potentially harmful because they can't adapt their judgment the way a human might.
So algorithmic bias isn't just about biased data then? It can also come from these sort of fundamental limits in how AI thinks?
It's often a mix. Biased data is a huge part of it, yes. But sometimes the design of the algorithm itself or its inability to truly understand context like we do can lead to biased or unfair outcomes. Regulators are definitely watching this space.
Like the FTC.
Exactly. The Federal Trade Commission in the U.S. has warned companies that if their AI systems lead to unfair or discriminatory practices, they could face enforcement action.
Which is why there's such a push for transparency testing, auditing, all the things mentioned in the sources. People want to know how these decisions are being made.
Understandably so.
Okay, let's bring this down to earth. Where do these theories and limits crash into reality? The trolley problem, but for real, with self-driving cars.
Right. This is where engineers have to make actual design choices. Autonomous vehicles will face situations where an accident is unavoidable. They'll need to make split-second choices that have life or death consequences.
And it's obviously way more complicated than the simple thought experiment.
Oh, vastly more. You've got uncertainty, what exactly will happen if I swerve. You've got physics speed, mass, road conditions. You've got legal liability, insurance headaches, public acceptance.
Yeah.
It's messy.
And you still have that human inconsistency. We want cars to minimize harm overall, but maybe not our harm.
Exactly. So how do you code that? What the sources suggest is that engineers are mostly trying to avoid making that explicit moral trade-off.
How?
By focusing intensely on prediction, seeing potential hazards much earlier, on prevention, using technology to avoid the crash scenario altogether, and on risk mitigation, making the outcome less severe if a crash does happen.
So trying to engineer the problem away rather than solve the ethical riddle directly.
Pretty much. It's a pragmatic approach to sidestep an arguably unsolvable moral programming task, at least for now.
But cars aren't the only place AI is making big calls. It's creeping into other really critical sectors.
Absolutely. Think healthcare, criminal justice, hiring, getting a loan. AI is increasingly involved in decisions that profoundly affect people's lives.
And often without much transparency, or maybe without enough human oversight.
That's a major concern. In healthcare, you've got AI trying to respect patient autonomy and do good, but we've already mentioned the bias risk in predictive tools, potentially worsening health disparities based on race, gender, or income.
And criminal justice. The stakes are incredibly high there.
Huge concerns about due process, equal protection. Those algorithmic risk assessment tools used for bail or sentencing. Studies suggest they can reflect and even amplify existing societal biases against marginalized groups.
Which explains the FTC's focus on discriminatory behavior again.
Right. The challenge is it's often hard to pinpoint why the AI made a specific biased decision. It's not usually explicit prejudice. It's complex patterns in the data leading to disparate outcomes that are hard to unpack.
Given all this, what are governments actually doing? The European Union seems to be taking a strong lead.
Yeah, the EU AI Act is seen as a landmark. They're aiming for what they call trustworthy AI.
Trustworthy AI, what does that entail?
It means AI systems need to meet three basic criteria. They have to be lawful, ethical, and technically robust. That's a pretty holistic view.
And they've broken that down further into specific requirements.
They have 7 key requirements. Things like human agency and oversight, technical robustness and safety, privacy, transparency, non-discrimination and fairness, and even societal and environmental well-being.
So a strong focus on human control and fundamental rights.
Very much so. Plus, proactive steps like requiring impact assessments for high-risk AI before it's deployed and mechanisms for feedback. They're really trying to set a comprehensive standard.
How does the U.S. approach differ? It seems less centralized.
It is, yeah. Complementary in some ways, but distinct. The U.S. relies more on a mix of executive orders, guidelines from specific agencies, and existing sector regulations. There's arguably a greater emphasis on letting industry innovate, balanced with government guidance and enforcement where needed.
Like that White House blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights.
Exactly, from 2022. That lays out principles like safety, effectiveness, protection from discrimination, data privacy, notice and explanation, human alternatives. But it's more focused on how to practically implement these safeguards.
And different agencies handle their own turf.
Right. The FTC tackles consumer issues, bias, privacy. The Department of Defense has its own framework for military AI. We're also seeing agencies appointing chief AI officers to manage things internally.
So, simplifying greatly, the EU is going for broad prescriptive rules, while the U.S. is more about targeted safeguards and practical guidance across sectors.
That's a reasonable way to put it. It reflects different regulatory philosophies, perhaps different balances struck between controlling risk and encouraging innovation.
But despite these different paths, is there a common ground emerging globally on the core ethical ideas?
Actually, yes. That's one of the really interesting takeaways from the sources. Even with different legal frameworks, there's remarkable agreement on the fundamental principles: transparency, accountability, fairness, human oversight, safety, respecting rights. These pop up almost everywhere.
So a kind of global consensus on the what, if not the how.
To a large extent. And this shared understanding is fostering cooperation between regulators, industry groups, and academics. You also see a lot of soft law standards and best practices from professional bodies or international organizations helping to create a baseline.
But the big challenge remains translating those nice principles into actual code, actual enforceable rules that work across borders and cultures.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How do you technically define and measure fairness in a way everyone agrees on? Plus, you've got the complexity of global operations and the fact that AI tech is evolving faster than the rule books can often keep up.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, the morality of machines is, well, it's literally one of the defining challenges we face. It pulls together philosophy, tech, policy.
It really forces us to ask deep questions. What does it mean to make a moral decision? Can a machine genuinely be moral, or is it just mimicking ethical behavior in ways we find acceptable?
And while we've definitely made progress, we have frameworks, guidelines, technical fixes.
Actually getting those principles reliably embedded into algorithms, rooting out systemic bias, bridging cultural divides on ethics. Those are still huge ongoing tasks. And as AI gets more powerful, the stakes just keep getting higher.
Looking forward, it seems like success hinges on keeping things human-centered, right? And continuing to innovate not just the AI itself, but how we govern and integrate it.
That global convergence on principles gives some hope, I think.
So maybe the final thought for you listening is this. Perhaps the ultimate goal isn't necessarily creating machines that are conscious moral agents in the human sense.
Yeah, maybe it's more about designing these complex socio-technical systems, the whole mix of people, AI, data, rules, so that they consistently reflect our shared human values, protect our ability to make choices, and actually enhance our collective ability to act ethically rather than trying to automate ethics itself.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the morality of machines. If you found this helpful, please like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more deep dives on the NextLayer podcast at the Quantanix YouTube channel.